Okay, I think we're live now, Tom. Yep. Okay. Okay. Like to welcome everybody. Thank you for attending. I can just about see everybody on the screen, but if you want to get my attention during the meeting, then raise a virtual hand and maybe a physical hand. And if I'm still ignoring you, then say something to me. So yes, welcome everybody, and welcome Sarah as well. Don't think you've joined us previously. I think I just wanted to start off by saying there's been some sort of very unfortunate incidents in Bristol, impacting some of our young people. So unprecedented times, and I just wanted us to sort of acknowledge that and recognise that all by us all working together is probably the way forward. So I just wanted to say that. Okay, Claudette. Then I think can we move on to forum standing business?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So the apologies so far for absence, if I've got this right. There's two union members, Steve Mills and Thomas Bolton, and Louise Nevers, representing St Bernadette's, gives her apologies. I think there's parents evening this evening. And Cameron Shaw gives his apologies. He's in between two appointments, travelling at the moment. And Councillor Asher Craig, this was to be her final meeting, has sent a email letter to you all. I'm hoping that she had the correct list and it arrived at everybody's inbox. And Denise Murray, as you know, she is leaving Bristol, sadly, leaving Bristol City Council. And in her stead is Sarah. Sarah, would you like to just introduce yourself and welcome yourself, please?
Thank you. Yeah, hello everybody. So I'm Sarah Chokovich. I'm the Head of Financial Management and Deputy 151 at Bristol City Council. So stepping in for this meeting.
Thank you very much, Sarah. The next item
Claudia, I think we should just sort of acknowledge that both Denise and Councillor Craig have been supportive of the forum over a number of years, and we should officially thank them for their support.
Thank you. I'll note that, Chair. The next thing is that the meeting's quorum. We're here. There are no new members or resignations, unless somebody's going. Haven't told me yet, but I'm sure that you will all share. But please do share if that's the case. The vacancies remain as they were. We do have academy reps required for the primary head and for the primary governor position, and also a vacancy for special academy. That's confirmed. So I will work to contact my contacts across the sector of Academy Trust to see whether or not they can send representatives for some other the Academy Trust, because we've got several here to be on the board. The next thing is declaration of interest. I don't think there is any needed for this evening, because as everyone is reminded, you're representing not only your setting but your whole sector in respect of decision making as set out in the code. That concludes my business, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And just to reminder, we've got a relatively shorter agenda today, partly because there's no decisions to be made, but this is going to be followed by training briefing, and that's going to be on a different Zoom number.
It is. It is, yes. And so everyone's welcome, particularly the new members, but everyone's welcome to join the training session, which follows this public meeting. Thank you. They all have the Zoom details, Chair.
Okay, thank you. So then we'll go on to the minutes of the previous meeting, which were circulated in the pack. So first of all, any comments? Can we confirm as the correct record?
Chair, I'd just like to say on 4A, 1V, I think it's supposed to say the task is for the whole system to be input to support the plan. As opposed to the
Did I say something else?
ask. There's no T. You forgot a T.
Thank you. It's not too bad then.
And in page 6, number 6, paragraph 2, where are we? I think the forum decisions will form part of the decision to be made by cabinet, not main by cabinet.
Ooh.
I'm not really good at this.
Okay. Thank you for picking up the typos.
That's right. But it sort of changes the whole idea of the thing. And then page 7, J, is planned, not planed.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, and thank you, Mandy. Okay, there were a few matters arising, which sort of fell between Rena and our finance colleagues. Rena, there's a couple of to do with the inclusion hub.
Yeah, I picked those up at the beginning of my presentation, Chair, both of them.
Okay.
The second one was about contact details as well.
Okay, thank you. And inclusion hub. Oh, and then yeah, that's future one. So then we had 3 finance ones. I think there was a separate note about those. So, Steve G, do you just want to talk to those?
Yeah, sure, Chair. In terms of the finance one, that was in respect to the transparency about the early years retention and where we could retain as an authority up to 5% of the funding, and at least 95% of the funding goes out to providers. I have circulated the full breakdown of the early years funding formula, which details the retention, the base rates, and everything else. That has been sent to all forum members. The second item was about how many schools were subject to the minimum funding guarantee in terms of the minimum funding levels, but protection built into the funding formula. Again, I've done an analysis of that and circulated it to forum, comparing the 2024 financial year to 2023-24. So you can see how the financial position is improving in terms of the lesser schools needing the levels of protection that are provided. The third finance item is something to be reported back to a future schools forum. That's in respect to the trade union facilities time and the review of how that operates. So that's a review for 24-25. So that will come to another meeting.
Thank you, Steve. That seems pretty comprehensive. Merch, question?
Yeah, I think Steve mentioned this last time, but I just wanted to confirm it. Those schools that are on the minimum funding formula, that's built into the amount that the government gives Bristol. Is that correct?
It forms part and parcel of the overall schools block, which is the funding that goes out through the formula to mainstream schools and academies. And the minimum funding guarantee is an inbuilt protection. So it protects schools from losing, to a minimum per pupil amount compared to the previous year. There's also the minimum per pupil funding levels, which is dictated by the Department for Education in terms of the overall funding per pupil minimum that schools can receive. So it's all part and parcel of the formula mechanism. It's an automatic protection.
But we've got almost, although it's going down, like 25% of schools which are on that sort of minimum level, is that topped up directly from government, or is it taken away from the other schools that are in Bristol?
Effectively, it's part and parcel of the overall schools block that we receive. We don't get additional funding for that protection. So yes, in effect, it is part, a commitment from the overall block. So it's money that we can't distribute to other schools. If no schools require protection, that money would be distributed to every school. But it's just one of the formula components to ensure those schools that do need protecting from one year to the next, it comes out of the overall schools block allocation.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you much. Any other questions or points on that? I mean, I just see the early years question there. Simon Holmes, I know you had the early years working group. Is anything you particularly want to bring to the forum's attention? And you're on mute.
Only really that, we did discuss the question that was put by Simon to the Schools Forum about the difference between £5.97 and £5.8, and to be fair, because quite a lot of governors have asked these questions and things, and it wasn't clear, and the breakdown from Stephen was very very helpful, but what I just kind of wanted was a bit of a narrative to go with it, so I've got one, so it might be helpful. So basically the 10p is a deprivation funding, which some settings could get more or less depending on the Adachi index for the area where they are. The 34p top slice is for the send pot of money, which is again across the whole sector. So all the children with additional needs, etc., that we get and put in funding for, the obviously hugely necessary, and that is a very good to know that we have that money that is accessible for all the settings. And the 15p quality system leadership, again, that is for supporting settings that might be having difficulties with Ofsted, or again, right across the sector. It's not just to maintain nursery schools, it's private schools, private sector, voluntary sector, to support schools in all kinds of different ways. And I know, there's a group of lead teachers, and at times we've used them for particular things. And so, yeah, so it was nice to have it sort of really clearly laid out, what the money is coming in, where it goes, the bits that are taken out, and what they're used for. So I think that was really helpful. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Simon. In which case, I think we're going to go on to agenda item 4, which is DSG budget monitor report. Steve, are you taking this?
Yes, that's me. Thanks, Chair. You've obviously got the report in the papers, and essentially this is the DSG forecast position to the end of the 2023-24 financial year. There's very little change, so this report is brief. There's very little change from what was reported to the previous Schools Forum in terms of the forecast. We're still reporting an overall deficit on the dedicated schools grant of 56 million, and as people are aware, that's subject to the safety valve intervention with the Department for Education. We're still facing the pressures on the high needs block due to outbound replacements, EHCP top-ups, volumes of education, health and care plans, etc. Essentially, it's just a very brief report for information. There's nothing changed from the previous report. We will update the final outturn position for the dedicated schools grant and all schools, and report that to the next meeting of Schools Forum. The report does include the forecasts based on the Q3 returns from schools in terms of their positions. We've got still overall a net deficit. Essentially, the nursery schools deficits are a big part of that. We've got overall 25 out of the 61 maintained schools that are seeing deficits. I couldn't tell you today how many of those 25 will set a balanced budget next year. I'm hoping that number doesn't increase. But the finance team, through the schools finance team, Traded with Schools, and my finance colleagues are all working with all those schools to ensure we can support them, to enable them to recover any deficits and sustain their balanced budgets going forwards. So there's lots of work behind all of this, but in terms of the update for Forum, it is as per the report there. There's nothing untoward, no shocks or big changes from the previous report. The schools in financial difficulty, we're working through supporting all the eligible primary schools and nursery schools to look how effectively we can use the funding to support the deficit recoveries. We've got the money provided from the Department for Education to enable us to do that, or to help with that. So that's not just about allocating money to schools, it's about working with those schools on transformation to go through all the strategic areas we can to recover those deficits and again enable them to sustain their balanced positions going forward into future years. The final aspect of the report, I know I'm whizzing through, is just to thank Forum for all your support in allowing us to submit a validated schools funding formula to the Department for Education. That was all recommended by yourselves at the January meeting. I think we had 2 days after that meeting to finalise it and submit it to the DfE, who go through their validations, and I've copied an email from them to say that we've complied with their checks, and they go through that process to then allow them to issue the Academy's budgets through the general annual grant and give us the sanction to issue school budgets by the end of February. So again, that was just for Schools Forum to note and to thank you for your support through achieving that.
Thank you, Steve. Simon E, we'll go to you.
Thanks, Chair. Steve, it's just a question really. Just in the last week or 10 days, the DfE issued the information about the grant that it's paying to schools for the additional pension contributions.
Mm-hmm.
And I just wondered what the feeling was amongst the maintained schools, certainly amongst the academy sector and the people I've spoken to. Pretty much everyone has said that it doesn't cover the additional cost, even just the period April to August, let alone what we might see in the budget from September. And we're seeing some schools saying as low as 65% of it being covered, but typically we're seeing sort of 80 to 90% being covered. Is that something that you're seeing amongst the maintained schools? And is there any plan to make any representation to the DfE as a result?
We are definitely seeing that across the maintained schools. I've not heard of 65%. The schools I'm aware of is more around 90% that the grant is covering in terms of the additional cost. Yes, it is something that we will report back to the Department for Education. They have acknowledged that the grant might not be sufficient to cover all the actual costs. And at this stage, there's absolutely no indication of any additional funding, and probably won't be until the autumn settlement, but that'll be looking ahead to any further ongoing costs. So at this moment in time, it is a pressure on all schools, and those figures you've mentioned will obviously have a bigger impact if schools are having to find up to 35% of the cost that the grant doesn't cover. So again, we just have to work with individual schools to try and mitigate that wherever possible, look for efficiencies, anything we can do to try to balance that pressure. It's obviously not of our making, but we will certainly report that back to the Department for Education and their schools and academies funding group.
Simon, do you think there's anything?
The 65, I think that was quite an extreme example. The majority I've seen are sort of 80 to 90%, but almost consistently, other than the odd freak school that seems to have made a bit of money on it. It just seems, it's obviously they haven't been able to secure as much funding as they'd hoped, because, previously, I think with the TPAG and the other ones, I think generally schools have found that it has covered that extra cost. So
definitely, yeah,
it was a bit of a bitter pill to swallow.
Yeah, we weren't expecting so many schools to be adversely affected, to be honest. But it is an issue nationally. It's not just an impact on Bristol. I know other schools in other regions are facing the same pressure. So it's disappointing, but at the end of the day, there's not much we can do about it at the moment other than to lobby the DfE and try to secure more funding for the future.
Chris.
Yeah, Steve, can I just ask about the first point in the schools for financial difficulty 3.7, where it says about the £676,000 grant that we've got from the DfE to help schools in financial difficulty.
Mm-hmm.
How and when is that going to be applied? Because at the last forum, it was agreed it will be applied to the 23-24 outcome.
I'm not sure if Travis wants to come in with any detail on that, but we have been looking at how we can allocate that within this financial year to a group of primary schools that are facing deficits. But what we're trying to do is to work with individual schools to see how we can manage the strategic aspects of their recovery. So if we need to carry some of that grant forward and use it in the new year, then that's what we'll need to do. So I haven't got any specific details in terms of how much will be specifically allocated this financial year and how much might be carried forward. But we are looking at that on the individual schools that are eligible for that support. As I say,
with budget setting, then how is that going to? Because with a school, how are we going to know if we're having any assistance at all?
I appreciate that. Yeah, obviously the schools that will be getting that support will be contacted directly, and that will enable them to factor that into that budget, whether it's the 23-24 or part of their planning for 24-25.
Because Denise did say it was 23-24 at the last meeting.
Yeah, I think it has been delayed. We're trying to make sure we are achieving the maximum benefit from that grant. It's obviously a small amount in the overall scheme of the deficits. So just to allocate it to individual schools doesn't really touch the problem. We're just trying to make sure we can work with all the individual schools, and we will be in touch with them directly to inform them of the plans for that.
Because my concern is that this came out in, would it be November-ish, something like that?
November time.
We're now, we're 4 or 5 months on, and as a school business manager, I have no idea whether we're going to be part of this or not.
Okay, I appreciate that, and we'll obviously make contact with the schools and confirm to everybody exactly where that funding is going to be allocated, just so everybody is assured then. And
that will be to schools who are getting it and to schools who aren't getting it.
Well, I think from what you've just said, you'll need to know that you're not getting it if you are one of those schools that aren't going to receive any. So you can't be planning that on the unknown, basically. I think Travis has just appeared on screen. I'm not sure if he's wanting to add to this.
Yeah, no, I'm sat here listening to all. So Chris, so schools have received their budget allocations for 24-25, and that's the budget envelope you're having to set your budgets in by the end of May. This 676,000 is for the LA to use to support schools which are in financial difficulty. And as Denise and other people have said in this room at the time, it's going to be shared between nursery schools and other schools which are in deficit. It won't necessarily be cash interventions for your schools, though. It could be whatever support is needed to make the change to bring you out of it. So the first thing is to try and set an in-year balanced budget as a minimum. And then where schools are in difficulty and having persistent difficulty, then this money is to facilitate the change to get there. So it's not necessarily cash payment to schools which need more money, because as Steve's already indicated, it doesn't make a great deal of difference if you try and do that, and it leaves the original problem.
Okay.
Right.
So when will we hear, when's the next, should we say, milestone in this?
In terms of
communication, or
so we will be receiving the budget submissions from schools by the end of May. We will know which schools, which sectors are in difficulty, and what interventions are needed. Potentially, those conversations can start, and we'll be bringing it back to the next schools forum on the use of that money as appropriate.
So as a school, we shouldn't be looking for any financial help when we're setting our budget at the moment.
As a school, you need to be looking at your announced funding envelope, which you've received at the end of February.
Okay.
Okay, we'll just take Sarah, and then I think that'll be it.
Thank you, Chair. Is that?
Oh, no, that's me.
Okay,
No, sorry,
sorry.
that's Sarah. That's Elle. Sorry.
Yeah, that's me. So my question is similar to Chris's actually, because I've just looked through the minutes and we didn't decide how to allocate that 676,000 at last forum, and the action was to share with us proposal this meeting or a future meeting, so that we could be reassured that the money was being allocated in the most fair and appropriate way. And I don't think that's happened. And I think I'd share Chris's concerns that we'd want to understand the methodology of allocating that funding out across those schools. And I know we've talked about it in and out, but I think I'd like to request that at the next meeting, we do get a breakdown of the proposal around how we share that funding across those schools, that we can be confident that it's been fairly distributed and those schools are understanding their financial position and what levers they have or don't have.
That's fine. I'm happy to take that as an action for next time.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think that's a pretty clear ask. So, yeah, thank you, Chris. Thank you, Sarah. In which case, we'll then.
I didn't know, Chair. Sorry to interrupt. I don't know if Sarah, the other Sarah, wanted to make a comment.
No, apologies. I was just saying I hadn't got my hand raised, so I didn't realise it was another Sarah. Sorry.
Sorry about that. Yeah. Okay. Right. We'll move on to Rena, please.
Thanks, Chair. I'm just going to try and navigate my screen to get up my presentation. Bear with me, colleagues. I have a number of windows open. Yeah. So forgive me, I only can see a few people. I can see you, Claudette, Chair, and Sarah Chokovich. So you might have to be supporting my navigation. Can everyone see the presentation?
We can. It's up now.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. So before I go into matters arising, I just wanted to thank leaders around the loss of young people across our city is unprecedented times, as Chair has already mentioned. But I did want to express my gratitude to all leaders, irrelevant of settings. You know, you've been kind, really supportive, and it's demonstrated what we can do when we all come together. So just a massive thank you from me as director. Really appreciate it. I also wanted to acknowledge the appointment and the start date of a head of service for inclusion, which I'm sure everybody will be very happy about. Emma Lloyd started her first day on the 18th of March, so she is currently in week 2 of her new role, so just a welcome to her. But then also a thank you to Councillor Asher Craig, just, you know, the support, the challenge, but also the significant contribution over a number of years to both education and skills. You know, she's allowed us to move in an agile and dynamic way, so I'm very, very grateful for her leadership. And I just wanted to acknowledge that, Chair, so thank you very much for that. So matters arising, I said that I would cover these. So there was the query regarding the Inclusion Hub. I've got more detail around these. I just didn't want to have it too text heavy. So the query was around when heads and or Senkos were briefed regarding the Inclusion Hub. So obviously this conversation around the Inclusion Hub has been fairly organic in terms of the move away from the inclusion panel and the fair access panel as to what it looked like and how leaders wanted to strategically move that in a different direction. This has all been done in collaboration with leaders from both BASHP and FAB, which is the Secondary Heads Association and the Primary Heads Association. So leaders have been part of this piece of work to evolve that alternative learning provision into the Inclusion Hub. You know, we recognise that actually the Bristol Inclusion Panel wasn't meeting the needs across the city, and it definitely wasn't meeting the needs of the young people, and it needed to be a bit more dynamic in how we could serve the families of Bristol. So a number of briefings, and I've got all these details if, you know, Chair Claudette, you require them. I've got the dates and the meetings as to who were involved, but there were a significant number of briefings that happened between May 2023 and February 2024, both internally as well as the steering group meetings that took place over a period of time, as you can see on screen, from January 2023 up until February 2024. And obviously these discussions are ongoing. So you can see this hasn't been a you know, a quick turnaround or something that hasn't been thought through in that process. Colleagues have been worked with, we've listened, we've understood what the requirements are, and we've taken feedback at many different levels. As you can see, when we've sought formal feedback in that way from specific phases, we had 14 secondary schools reply to our feedback and 23 primary schools, but everyone has had access to feedback via both Primary Heads Association and the Bristol Secondary and Principals steering groups as well. So, you know, for any point over, what is that, just over a year's worth of briefings, collaboration, co-production, you know, that any colleague across the city feels that they haven't had access to contribute, then please do reach out, because I'd like to know where we've missed that gap over this long period of time. And then obviously the second part of the Matters of Rising were around key contact details. So you've got the head of the Inclusion Hub, which is Mark Kennedy, and you've also got Natasha Spence, who works alongside him. But then also a key contact detail would be Emma Lloyd. But just a quick plug, we do have 2 Emma Lloyds in the organisation, so just a quick highlight around her email address. I wouldn't want the other Emma Lloyd to get emails that aren't for her. I can see Tonya's hand. Tonya?
Yes, yeah, it was just you were talking about groups that had been included, special. So you talked about BASHP and so on. I don't think special heads were included in this. Certainly in the because the dates that you were talking, May 23 to February 24. Yeah, so I think special heads may have been missed out on that.
Okay, I'll go back to Mark and Tash and see whether I've missed anything, but I'll also take that feedback to them, Tonya. I mean, if you've got any concerns around the move towards an inclusion hub, then, you know, I do stress, please do reach out to Mark and Tash. They're more than happy to take any comments, any feedback around it. You know, it is, I would say, the move towards an inclusion hub is much better than where we have been in terms of that inclusion panel. You know, practices are much better. It's much more holistic. It's much more aligned to special, and definitely meeting the needs of SEND and working more closely with the SEND service as well. So, you know, I will take that on board. I will feed that back and make sure that that's acknowledged. But I do stress, Tonya, please reach out if you've got any comments, questions, queries or concerns, as always.
Yeah, I think this is quite an exciting project, and so I just think, and I think the reason why maybe that we may not have been included is because we're not normally part of these panels and things like that, because we students come to us through different means. However, but it's the fact that inclusion's been, you've got inclusion in there now in terms of working together and so on, and so there's an alternative learning providers that has an impact on special as well. So I think it's just making sure that we're kept up to date on what's going on, and we're part of those discussions as well, and shaping what this new service will look like.
No, it's a really fair comment, Tonya. I'll make sure that I feed that back. I'm sure if Mark's not watching, that his head of service will be, but we'll feed that back formally as well. Thank you. I can't see any other hands, but if there are, please do shout out.
Thank you, good, Rena.
Oh, thank you. So we'll get to the exciting bit, which I'm sure everybody's got a number of questions around, that sustainable inclusive SEND system. So this is really about the safety valve. I know that everyone will be eager to ask questions. If I can just ask colleagues, just because I can't see everyone, If I could get through the information, if I don't answer your question, I'm more than happy to take your question at the end. And if I don't have the information to hand, then I will definitely feed back via Claudette, so that you've got that record of your question being answered as well. So safety valve, I'm just going to go from the basics, and then hopefully I can cover absolutely everything that we need to. So who is the safety valve for? The safety valve is for any local authority with significantly high DSG deficits. It's always really nice because they tell you that you are invited to be part of safety valve. It's less of an invitation, more of a I would say a proposal that this is something that you would definitely like to be part of. Local authorities that have less severe deficits with their DSGs, they tend to be invited to be part of the Delivering Better Value, which colleagues know we've already been part of that programme, and we had £1 million provided as part of that programme for some test and learn work, which might cause some confusion. We are part of the, I would say, very few local authorities who are transitioning from Delivering Better Value into the safety valve. Our work hasn't stopped around the Delivering Better Value. We are still working with settings, and we are still looking at our test and learn pilots, and what we can significantly almost get ahead of before the safety valve programme really comes into play. So what is a safety valve? Well, traditionally, and I would say for many local authorities, it is a 5-year plan. So before you even enter into any form of agreement, the Department for Education make it very clear that it is a 5-year agreement between the DfE and individual local authorities. And the role of the DfE in this is to hold local authorities to account around our SEND reforms, and becoming that, financially stable. But it is ensuring that our SEND strategy is at the heart of the work that we do, and that the experience and the value for young people and families, for those with SEND, is that of quality, and that is absolutely paramount for all the discussions that have taken place in the lead up to safety valve. So when does it happen? So what is expected from us as a local authority is that over that 5-year, the local authority is expected to reach an in-year balance, and over that period of time there is a lot of accountability. There is very much a scrutiny element to our participation as part of the programme, and we are held to account, rigorously, and there is a robust system in place. So how will it happen? What we have entered into is a 6-year transformation plan, of where we've identified any investment costs, and we've outlined the work that we're doing around our strategy for SEND as well. And obviously it is to build on the work that is currently happening or is already in flight, as mentioned previously in different schools forums around our management plan. So we've been really clear around what our management plan looks like, each work stream, down to who the programme leads are, and building on our Delivering Better Value work as well, because we know that's been significantly of value for us. So why have we been invited to be part of Safety Valve? Without repeating everything that Stephen shared earlier, it is really around that accumulated deficit of 56 million. That would be our position towards the end of 23-24. And obviously the forecasted in-year deficit as well that currently exists. So a quick overview regarding the strategic approach. So first and foremost, what we have acknowledged is that in order for SEND to be sustainable, for the financial health of the organisation to be sustainable, that it really is about the culture that is created as part of our SEND strategy. It is that shared responsibility, of course, that shared accountability, and that we have that learning process that is underpinned by the trust that we have with leaders across the city. We do want to have a system where good outcomes are at the heart of the strategy, but also enable our young people to be successful in their next steps, and that they have opportunities that are available to them, and we want to ensure that equity exists. So it really is about how do we create that SEND system where young people with SEND can remain in mainstream provision for longer. I'll always come back to it is about the right provision at the right time for the right young person, and meeting the individual needs of the young person as well. It's really important that we continue to build on strengthen practice, that we take a look at the physical spaces that we have. It's ensuring that that provision meets the need of the young people, and that this is about the individual level of each child, and that we have specialist provision where it is required, because it is required for some of our young people, and I'm sure Tonya would agree. It's about having an efficient system that is also effective as well. We acknowledge that it's about that timely support, it's about the right level of funding, and it's about working with leaders across the city to continue to build and strengthen our relationships. I wholeheartedly believe this, that leaders are key stakeholders alongside our parent carer forum, but also our young people as well, and acknowledging where their voice fits into this and the strategy. So what I've tried to do here, and what colleagues have, might have seen this slide before, is we've tried to break down the strategic focus for you into 4 key themes, so that you can see what we're focusing on within the strategy and within the management plan as well. So it really is about our sufficiency, meeting the demand, the efficiency, and the partnerships as well. So again, coming back to sufficiency, so ensuring that we've got the right level of provision to meet the needs of all children and young people. And as colleagues may or may not have seen today, and Chair, I'm more than happy to come back to this point, but the DfE have formally announced on their .gov website today that the Bristol Special Free School, the trust has been named, and that has been formally announced. So obviously that will support the sufficiency across the city. A lot of forensic work has gone into our sufficiency regarding, what does that provision look like? What are the needs of the city? Do we have the right sufficiency in place? So Enable have been named as the trust who will lead on that Bristol Special Free School, which is great news for the city. And it'll be even better once this comes into place, because we know that it will provide that additional sufficiency that we need. We've obviously been forensic and very granular when we've had to submit all of our documentation to the DfE regarding safety valve, particularly around demand, and knowing actually what that demand looks like. We've looked at birth rates, we've looked at death rates, we've looked at the bulge at secondary, the impact that would have on special schools, the impact that would have post-16. What does that look like at early years as well? So we've had to be really granular in terms of identifying that demand that's coming through, and making sure that we can support where that demand is coming through across the city as well. We've also looked at efficiency, so ensuring that we're not just efficient, but we're also effective in the systems. Ensuring that schools have the right level of funding at the right time to meet the needs of the young people. I know this is quite topical, and I know colleagues around the virtual table tonight will have lots of questions around funding. What does it look like? There are a number of changes happening post-consultation with the Delivering Better Value work. So I'm hoping that I can clarify some of those questions and queries as we move through the deck. And of course, finally, it's not forgetting partnerships. It's a key focus for us. Although the local authority has entered into this agreement, it is about the partnerships that we have with leaders, with settings, with parents and carers, with the young people, and wider stakeholders as well, because it is about strengthening those relationships. It is about co-production, collaboration, engaging with as many different stakeholders throughout this process. And to clarify, the submission for Safety Valve was not something that we could, do as part of co-production. This was a strategic need for the organisation, for not just for the financial health of the organisation, but also to ensure that we could meet the needs of the young people, and to ensure that we have the right strategic direction, we have the right SEND strategy in place, and that children and young people are at the heart of what we're doing and entering into this agreement about. So this slide is very heavy on numbers. So I'm grateful that we've got finance, but I've spoke to this slide many, many times before, and I'll try to draw colleagues' attention to certain areas. So forgive me if there's lots of animation going on, but I want to try and circle and highlight. So as you can see, if I take that off, the first top two lines, we have our mitigated position and our unmitigated position. The second line, which is the unmitigated position, this would be if the local authority did absolutely nothing in regards to the DSG. And that means that we did nothing, we just put everything down and we didn't move, any fingers to ensure that we could, have a significant impact for our young people. As you can see in the direction that those numbers are moving towards, this would put us in a position where we wouldn't be sustainable as an organisation. However, thankfully, that is not the case, and we are doing things, and many of our mitigations are in flight. But once we have all mitigations in place, then the DSG deficit position moves in a slightly different direction. And as you can start to see, it is in 28, 29 when we start to move towards a break-even position, and where you can start to almost see us turning that financial curve. We've taken into consideration inflation when looking at our finances and the financial predictions around this. And obviously this is uncontainable, but we've had to really consider what that would look like. And the finance team have broken that down. We've also looked at the contribution from reserves as well, and what the local authority would be putting into this financial agreement. And then we've also looked at the contribution from the DFE and what we would be requesting in order to move us in the right direction for financial sustainability and financial health of the organisation, because without that we can't keep our young people at the forefront and at the centre of what we do. So lots of numbers, but what I'm trying to share with you and show to you is that this isn't just about the financial contribution from the DFE. We've also looked at our reserves. I'm very grateful for the 0.5% contribution from Schools Forum. Although that's been planned out into this document, please don't feel that this isn't something that we'll be coming back to annually. We will annually keep coming back to Schools Forum as agreed with Chair to ask for that contribution to support us with our financial health of the safety valve programme, but also ensuring that we can, provide a significant, effective service for our young people. So what we have here is just a breakdown of all of the different themes, the different work streams, what is considered a mitigation, such as the new specialist provision would be considered a mitigation and how that supports the financial health, but then also key enablers. So, for example, being able to hold an annual SEND summit. This might not be a financial mitigation, but it is definitely a huge enabler to ensuring that we have the right culture in place for the entire city to move in the direction that we need to move in. I've not spoken to a leader yet who hasn't agreed that a young person with an EHCP can have their needs met within a mainstream setting if they don't need a specialist provision. But it's more about those forensic questions as to, well, how can I do that? What does that look like? What support will be in place? How can we support teachers and SENCOs and leaders across the city more widely? How can we engage parents, carers and the young people themselves to ensure that we meet their needs within mainstream settings? So we've tried to give you a bit of an array around that programme activity so you can see what we're looking at in terms of the mitigation plan. So the current funding model, which I know will be a question on everyone's tongues tonight, will be around, well, what does the current funding model look like? So this is what we currently have in place, which is where we have what is known as top-up. So we have our EHCP funding, and then we have our non-statutory funding. And you can see I've been quite transparent around the allocation of 23 and 24, you know, where our greatest demand has come through for our non-statutory funding, and then the needs for that non-statutory funding for colleagues, forgive me, around the acronyms. So SEMH is around social, emotional, mental health. SLCN is around speech, language and cognition. So we've tried to be really transparent and really open with colleagues as to what the funding has been used for over this year. This is the proposal. Not sure why my deck won't move forward. Oh, there we go. So this is the proposal around the future of funding model. So the current top-up funding model will be phased out. We're looking at a single panel to be put in place. We're looking to have current non-statutory funding commitments in line with current agreements, but no longer than the 3 years that we've identified. We've looked at utilising a delivery partner to provide that specialism in terms of how we can co-design the new non-statutory offer. And I think this bit's significantly important, that, you know, the new head of service for inclusion and a delivery partner in line to help not only, you know, provide that support, but also to hold us to account, to ensure that we're being as dynamic, as creative as possible alongside leaders. To co-design this will be really important. We've identified a targeted funding, but also outreach support as well, which will be incredibly important. So this is a key piece of work that I'm sure lots of colleagues around the virtual table tonight would want to be part of. And then a development period of this piece of co-designing and co-construction between periods of April and July, and then for us to make this operational from September. So you can see the timeline is really clear, and I know that a number of the workshops will be happening next month. So if colleagues haven't had an invite to those, then please do, you know, reach out to Emma, let her know, and we'll make sure that any invite lists and distribution lists that you're part of that. So obviously that funding and support will be outcome focused. We know that it needs to be time bound, and we know that we need to demonstrate those that impact, but also those improved outcomes. It's really important for us to ensure that we acknowledge that our young people with SEND have an entitlement to those improved outcomes and an equitable opportunity for them to go on to be successful, you know, through whichever routes they choose to go down. For me, it is about the opportunities that young people have and the choices that they are able to make. So I'll be really quick, Chair, because I'm sure there's a number of questions and I'm just trying to keep myself in check around education providers, what we're looking at, that targeted funding and outreach model, the use of our school improvement offer is all being wrapped into this, that intervention in inclusion hub that Tonya you know, rightly made a statement around, and including special heads, and obviously the back team as well. So we've really tried to have that holistic approach to what we want to do. So that brings my presentation to a close. Before I open it back up to you, Chair, I just wanted to acknowledge, I know Esther, you sent through a number of questions. I've got all of those answers for you. I think there were about 6 or 7 questions, so I can get those via Claudette answered to you. I can't see you around my screen, so I'm really sorry.
Okay, so thank you. So yeah, so Esther had sent some questions that you've noted those and respond to those. Thank you, covered a lot of ground there, and I can see Tonya's got a hand up, and I've got Murch who's got a hand up as well. So we'll start with Tonya, please.
Yeah, there was kind of 3 questions I've got. The first was, you were talking about the delivery partner and the head of inclusion. Who is the delivery partner?
So the delivery partner is social finance.
Okay.
Yeah. So PPR, yeah.
Thank you.
We just thought for that consistency, Tonya.
Yes.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, thank you. And the second question I had was, how effective is the safety valve program? And this kind of leads on to my third question, because you were talking about test and kind of test and see what's happening and so on. Because my concern and worry, so this isn't to do with Bristol per se, but this is to do with this program in general. Is this going to be another, are they going to have to create another level on top of that? So we had the kind of the first level where we were working on, where it was deemed that we weren't in a financial situation with that, and now we've gone up to this next one. What evidence does the DfE have that the safety valve program works, first of all? And second, and this goes back to what I was saying, really, I mean, it's the, I get the wanting to have children stay in mainstream education, absolutely, those with the EHCPs, but if you're working with, say, a mainstream school that has got a school that was designed in the Victorian era that doesn't support the child with speech, language and communication needs, and there's not enough money to change the building and whatnot, is Bristol going to be kind of penalised because they can't deliver on what the DfE is given, because actually it's an impossible task? It basically is the education system set up so that, I mean, why there's so many local authorities who are having their high needs budget, why is there such a big overspend? And I suppose this is not a question for here really, but does the system work at the moment? And we trying to plug gaps in where we need to just sit back and say, right, okay, how do we work with these group of young children? What do we need to look at? Do we have to look at the whole of the education offer that we provide them? Are we just trying to support a system that is no longer fit for purpose for these children who are crying out and saying that this current model doesn't work for me? We are having children who are hurting each other because they're saying, actually, I'm not being heard, I'm not being listened. And it's not through lack of, everyone sat around this table is doing all that they can to help these children. And I just feel like the powers that be need to step back and say, actually, we're throwing all this money. Do we need to relook at the SEND code of practice? Do we need to relook at our educational offer? And so this is, it's just putting it out there. So I know you, Irina, you can't answer these questions, but it'd just be interesting to know how effective the safety valve program is. So I'll go back to that.
Okay. So Tonya, you got some big questions there, and then I also heard some specific things about evidence of the effectiveness and the practicalities of making it work in mainstream session. And I know I've got 4 other hands raised as well. So Rena, those 2 specifics initially, perhaps.
Yeah, well, Tonya, I mean, you've hit the nail on the head. I can't speak for the DfE, and I would never dream of speaking for the DfE. And as we know, this is currently being live streamed. So I would never wish to put myself in that position. In terms of the evidence of safety valve working, you know, please, I do ask that colleagues, you know, almost for your bedtime reading and homework, you know, take a look at other local authorities as well and the agreements that are entered into. You know, I can reassure members that there is a lot of rigorous accountability. The scrutiny is huge in terms of you know, how the DfE will be holding us to account to ensure that we're meeting the needs of what we've entered into the agreement for. But I can't speak on behalf around the evidence. I'm really sorry, Tonya. I don't have that, and I wouldn't dream of commenting on it either. But I do.
That would be your answer, so that's fine. That's okay. And it was an unfair question. I do realise that.
No. You know, I think SEND reforms are key to us nationally. So yes, if there is ever an opportunity to feed into those discussions, and of course you have my assurances as a schools forum that I would feed into them and ensure that our voices are heard from Bristol.
Okay, we're going to go to Merch, then Joe W, then Esther M, then Simon H.
I just wanted to sort of clarify my understanding of what's being proposed. My understanding is that by phasing out top up, funding will go with EHCPs, which seems to make a lot of sense, and that there's going to be a 3-year transition on top-up funding for non-statutory cases. My concern is that it seems to me that work needs to happen really early on to have the most impact on pupils' outcomes, and if that work needs to be done probably before the EHCPs are in place. So in the longer term, how is that going to be funded?
How will the work early on be funded, Murch?
Yeah, before the EHCPs have been
achieved,
have been set up.
Yeah, so no, it's a really fair question, because that work will need to start as early as without repeating the word early, as early as working with our early years setting. And I know, see Simon on my screen, I think it's integral and key that we start that work as soon as possible, that we engage with families, we also engage with settings and leaders around it. I think in terms of how will that be funded, early years is funded slightly differently, particularly around SEND. So I think this is about how we have that system leadership of those education improvement officers, how we get into different settings and work with them as quickly but also as early as possible. I don't think it's about creating a new funding stream or a new funding line, but it's about how we use the current resources that we've got to tap into those and to work with the leaders. And there is some really great practice happening within early years. You know, we've got the stronger practice hubs. All of this needs to funnel through, and it's almost as if the SEND strategy has given us that agency to really go all the way back to the beginning. We've stripped our entire process and system back to say, right, this is where we've got to start to look at. So I don't think it's necessarily just about how one element is funded, it's how we use those resources to have a much more widespread impact as early as possible, Murch.
Yeah, I think that's fine, but I think at the end of the day, you know, if you have 4- and 5-year-olds with significant needs, they're in a mainstream school. How do you, you know, deal? How can you put extra adults in where they're needed?
Looking at therapy frameworks and how we intervene, and completely hear and
because
agree.
there is, you know, there isn't any money at all in schools' normal budgets for that. So somehow there needs to be a way of getting money to the schools to be able to do that work.
And how we can, I would say, work more collaboratively as well. Sometimes that expertise doesn't necessarily come from, you know, just within the local authority. You know, we've got colleagues around the screen who are well versed in this, and it's tapping into those resources and how we collectively work together as well. But no, noted, Murch, agreed. Jo, I think, was next.
Hello, thank you. My question was just around the response from parents and carers, because obviously you hear this, you hear cuts, you get worried about what's going to happen to your child. So I would just be interested to hear what sort of communications you've been having with that.
So I think for transparency, I would say it's really difficult when something like this hasn't been co-produced, Jo. You know, this wasn't an option to be co-produced. This was a financial agreement entered into by the local authority with the Department for Education, which makes it really hard because we weren't allowed to speak about it. So I think the response has been mixed, and I'm trying to be as honest as possible. However, I value the Parent Carer Forum, but also those voices that come through. I think this is very much about how we reassure, but also bring them in as part of that co-production, particularly around the next steps for that targeted fund, and that has already been built in to the process. So it's keeping those lines of communication as really open. It's inviting them to be part of any co-production right from day dot. We've worked on our Parent Carer Forum Bristol Charter as well for our way of working as part of our accelerated progress plan. That's been really exciting. You know, last week there was the SEND conference that was run by the Parent Carer Forum, but supported by we had you know, colleagues from social care, we had colleagues from the SEND team across health, all being involved as part of that. So I think the more that we can generate a holistic approach to now how we move forward, I think the better it will be. And for me, that is indicative of, you know, how successful we're going to be with the programme. You know, our parents and carers are really one way into our young people and recognising their voice. So it's been mixed, but I'm hoping that whilst they're part of our journey, we can take them on that journey as well to ensure that we hear them, we listen to families. You know, they've been part of the strategy work that we're doing. So we're moving in a healthier direction, and I really do value what they bring to the forefront. But Jo, you know, definitely if you need me to bring any more back to Schools Forum, then, you know, I can keep colleagues informed. But thank you for your question.
Thank you, Rena.
Esther? Oh, sorry, Chair.
Sure. Esther, we can't hear you.
I don't think her audio's joined the meeting.
Tell you what, we'll come back to Esther and then we'll jump to Simon H. Who's on?
Yeah, no, thank you. Yeah, sort of picking up a bit on what Mert said, and it's I think, you know, and what Rena said, it's about having the right intervention at the right time, and actually often it's the speed at which you can get things put in place, and what, you know, so we put in a lot of work in nurseries and in early years settings for children under the age of 5, preschool. Last year, I think we completed 12 EHCPs. So those children going into reception classes were already identified and the support there. So presumably in this new system, they would go in with the EHCP with the funding, and that would therefore meet the need. The issue I got really at the moment is the amount of time it is taking for children to get the reports from health professionals and from various different agencies in order to get an EHCP. And that's kind of a bit out of our control. So, I mean, that's something I've talked about for a long time, but I think, you know, we have the problem immediately with these children. We can't wait till 2030 for a good system. I mean, these are the children in front of us now being told, well, yeah, you can't see a paediatrician for 2 years. Yeah, you can't go on, you can't have your autism assessed, or if you're having an autism assessment, you can't access the speech and language service. There's all kinds of anomalies and things which seem to trip up a smooth process and a clear pathway for these children to get the help they need. And I think a lot of we need more coordination with health. And I mean, one thing that really kind of struck me today when someone, you know, a senior person in our setting was told, well, we can't take your evidence because within this process, the school is not regarded as a professional, even though we're the people that spend, you know, every hour of the day with these children, identifying these, putting in all this paperwork, and then told, yeah, but you don't count as professionals in this process. I think there's all sorts of things around the culture and the way things are structured that really needs addressing. And that is the only way, if that happens, that we will get the speed to have the timeliness for the children's needs to be met when they are. So I'm just wondering, within this whole process, where does early years fit into this, and how can we help join things together so that it is more, there's a more joined up approach with the different agencies?
Yeah, I think again, big questions, a bit like Tonya's. Some of it, you know, I can't answer, but wherever we have an opportunity to feed into reforms, particularly with the Department for Education, I think it's imperative that that voice and that element that you've just said is recognised. I think in terms of how can early years support, like, I will take any help, but also you are already built in to the strategy, you're already built into our next steps and how we're going to engage with you. You know, leaders for early years within the local authority are already engaged and plugged into the work that we're doing. and particularly the project managers that are working across maintained nursery schools, but also our DSG as well, speak regularly so that we're having that coordinated response. We're engaging with health and social care as well. So I'll feed back some of those comments that you've just shared as well. But Simon, you'll know this. I'm a huge advocate for early years. You know, I'm wholeheartedly believe that if we get this right at the beginning, then we only ever advantage our young people to be successful later on. You know, I'm really passionate about the strategy that we invest in, and the culture and the practice that we learn from early years, because there is some strong work that we need to be able to continue throughout a child's journey in education. So you're definitely already built in, trust me.
Thanks.
Thanks, Simon.
Thank
Esther,
you.
not sure if your sound's working. No, can't hear you.
Esther, if you can type it, we can take it.
If she leaves
Something
and then
that-
rejoins her, she might need to click on the sound, but the system indicates that it might be something on your device. Is your volume up? Just a question on your laptop. Sometimes we turn our volume down and therefore it can't be heard, but
I'm not sure if it's about your questions, Esther, but for colleagues for transparency, and just whilst I'm flipping screens, I can't see everybody, but Esther asked a question around clarification to heads around options. She asked a question around the targeted fund approach, how this will be constructed. She asked a question around methods of communication, how will schools receive funds according to their EHCPs, wider plans for any increased applications, and then the reason for some new consultation paperwork with SENCOs. I think the most pertinent one is probably around the increase in applications for EHCPs at primary. So Chair, if you don't mind if I just answer that one question, but to provide reassurance, Esther, that I've answered all of them, I will get them to you via Claudette. But for that specific question around, and I know it is a concern around the increase in applications that will be made for EHCPs. So we've invested over in total 600,000 to improving our EHCP process. We're trialing robotics to speed up that time consuming that administrative process that happens over that financial year. We're reviewing our operating model internally within education to maximise the workforce and improve that efficiency around timeliness. I would definitely say, looking at our processes and systems, we've tried to get ahead of the game before we were even, being considered as part of Safety Valve, because we knew that we weren't, delivering a service where we were, I would say, providing that standard that we would want or expect for young people, but also for leaders. So we acknowledge that this is a concern. We're doing a number of things to try to intervene as early as possible to avoid any disruption to the service, because we know that disruption to the service will mean disruption for our young people, and that's not what we want. Entering into this agreement will only ever mean that we can be better with what we provide. And questions like the 6-7 that you sent will only ever keep us on our toes, and I'm grateful for that challenge as well. So I've answered the others in more detail, Claudette. I will get those to you tomorrow morning. And then hopefully you can get those out to wider members, including Esther as well. Is that okay, Chair?
Thank you, Rena. The only thing I'm sort of aware of is Joe Kingston. There was a letter that you submitted, which was copied in, which was associated with a particular school. It's probably not appropriate to talk about a particular school here, but Rena, do you want to just say anything about sort of general principles there? And Joe, if you want to say anything.
So we've tried to reach out to the head teacher on Monday. I've not managed to get through. However, I've broken down some of the concerns that were raised within the letter. I think there's some clarification that's needed, but this isn't the forum for me to discuss those. You know, I'll definitely ensure that either myself or my head of service reaches out to the head teacher to clarify any of those concerns with them. But we've done our own analysis within the local authority over the last 24 hours to make sure that we can answer those queries. So, Jo, happy to take any questions that are for this forum here and now. Otherwise, we can take it offline.
Yeah, thank you for that. I was just asked to forward it to the schools forum as the rep for the Catholic school, so I just did that. But I'm happy to be involved if you'd like me to be involved in discussion with the head teacher in the school, if that would help as well offline.
Thanks, Jo. I'll reach out to you if it's needed, but thank you, appreciate it.
Okay, I guess the last thing is, Rena, how, looking forward, how are you proposing to involve the school forum, and how can we be a part of making this successful?
Well, I definitely think any of the co-production work that's needed, you know, the more that we have representation across all different phases, you know, the better our co-production will be. I think regular updates for schools forum, you know, I'm more than happy to commit to those. I think it's really important that we have that rigor and robust process here, not just accountability, but also the support for that work. I would say those would be my two current asks off the tip of my tongue, please, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I think that's fine. That's very helpful. I have let the discussion go on. So we're sort of overdue on our finishing time. However, it's obviously a critically important topic.
Yeah.
Having said that, I'm now going to say, has anybody else got any other topics or any other business before I draw this section of the meeting to close? And that's no. The follow-on session, I'm not sure who's leading. Is that Steve, Travis? Who's leading the sort of?
Yeah, it's the finance team. Yeah.
Yeah, it's me, Chair.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. So, so I guess Stephen, people will leave the meeting now and then can re-enter
The other Zoom, yes.
in the other Zoom.
Yeah, please.
In which case, thank you for your questions. Thank you for your contribution, and I will see everybody at the next meeting. Thank you.